Joining us now from New York is Dovid Efune, editor-in-chief and CEO of the Algemeiner media site. Dovid, thanks for joining us. These are similar situations to what we're experiencing in Israel. What's been the reaction there in New York and the Jewish community to these latest moves by New York State, by Governor Cuomo especially?
So look, I can't speak to what's happening in Israel. Obviously, the focus of our publication is more local. But there really has been fury and outrage in the Orthodox Jewish community, and there are a couple of reasons for that. First and foremost, today there was a statement from a group of Orthodox Jewish politicians that were highlighting this. I mean, first and foremost is the optics of it. I mean, there were a number of zip codes. There are now 13 zip codes that have been highlighted. Some of them have heavy Jewish populations, Orthodox Jewish populations, some of them less so. For example, the one that has the highest rate of infection, that's 11204 in Bensonhurst and Mapleton, actually used to have a Jewish population decades ago, but now it's more sort of Middle Eastern, Russian and Mexican, frankly. So the idea that there is this focus in the press conferences and in public statements on the Orthodox Jewish community, even if there are legitimate issues to be addressed there, just highlights really opportunities for anti-Semitism and for those groups to be targeted and for the Orthodox Jewish community to be seen really as a scapegoat over here. And we've seen that translate on the streets of New York already. And the Orthodox Jewish community is saying, look, work with us. We know that there's a lot to work on. But singling us out in this way in a very, very public forum is damaging, it's harmful, and counterproductive.
Right. Certainly those are legitimate concerns, Dovid. But as you say, there are concerns with COVID-19 cases. There's also some behavior, let's stress, by some elements in the I would say more the ultra-Orthodox community. We saw a scene in Brooklyn, on a street in Brooklyn. It didn't look like that small a crowd where people were throwing their masks into a bonfire in the middle of the street. So where is that not concerned? We're looking at some of that now. The question is being asked, where's the leadership in those communities to prevent scenes like that? And also to prevent these confrontations, some of these scuffles that we did see yesterday?
Look, we've seen a lot of the leaders in the Orthodox Jewish community come out and make some very strong statements. Of course, there are those that are disregarding the statements as well. I think the challenge that you have here, and by the way, this is a challenge when it comes to all manner of policing and getting communities to comply with a broader goal, is that it needs to be constructive, it needs to be collaborative. And what we saw the Orthodox Jewish politicians saying today was that they've been completely excluded from the conversation. Any group, any population that feels like they're being singled out and being subjected to draconian measures without their input, without their participation, without their ability to cooperate, you're likely going to see this kind of reaction. And certainly the Jewish community sees the Orthodox community sees a very clear double standard. It wasn't so long ago that there was a very liberal approach taken to mass rallies, that we saw race riots, that we saw in protests on the streets of New York. And I think what's important for politicians to understand is, yes, it's true there's a health crisis that's being dealt with here, but the Orthodox Jewish communities are just as passionate about their religion as BLM protesters are about their politics and their agenda as well. And that's something that I think they've got to be sensitive to, and they've got to take a collaborative and constructive approach if they want to get results. It's when you get this sort of forceful draconianism that you're going to be met with resistance, which is what we're seeing on the streets. I don't think there's an inherent unwillingness to work with and produce the best possible results for the health of all communities. I mean, certainly the preservation of life is the highest Jewish priority, especially for Orthodox Jews will be very aware of that. So I think a lot of what we're seeing is more a reaction to how this is being handled as opposed to what the actual directives are.
Let me ask you about that, Dovid. Do you believe, I mean, those restrictions, by the way, 25% of capacity, as I said, a maximum of 10 seems designed to allow a minyan, for example, in a synagogue. Those restrictions, if they were presented in any way at all, do you think they would be accepted by the ultra-Orthodox communities, for example, in Brooklyn, Queens, Muncie, for example?
Look, I can't speak for everyone, right? You know, in the end of the day, you have a mix. We're seeing from the leadership good and strong messaging. We're also seeing segments and elements that are not following and are protesting and reacting in a different way. But I can say this. I mean, this is what the Orthodox Jewish politicians and people of responsibility on the state and city level came out and said yesterday. They felt like we've been bait and switched. They had a meeting with Cuomo yesterday where he said that he was looking to enforce a 50% capacity at the synagogues. And then he came out later and put out a statement that said, a maximum of 10. And they felt, clearly from their statement, they felt blindsided. If they had been in the loop on this, if there had been some discussion and cooperation, I think they could come up with a compromise that achieved both objectives. There are a lot of different ways to do this. We see outdoor minyanim taking place.
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of different ways to dice the fish, if you will. And I think with a little bit more cooperation and collaboration and mutual respect, you're going to end up with better results here.
Right, and we should note there are going to be apparently some court challenges to these restrictions. Federal government may get involved. President Trump tweeting his displeasure at these measures, so we'll have to see how that develops. Dovid Efune, editor-in-chief of the Algemeiner in New York, thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure.